like to welcome and introduce our guest, Mila, and just give a little brief summary. So, Mila is originally from the Philippines and has lived and worked in many countries all over the world. Her discernment and appreciation of the customs and cultures in various countries, as well as her experiences of marginalization, started and bolstered her advocacy for inclusion, diversity, and equity in all aspects of life. She has written many poems, personal essays, and articles on these themes, including five bilingual children's books. So that's in English and in Filipino. Mila is a member of the Inclusion and Diversity Council at her workplace and a member of community organizations promoting human rights. Mila contributed her immigration journey story for the Paint the Rails, as well as read two of her poems during the launch. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Mila. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Idara. And thank you, everyone, again for being here as I share stories about my community and about myself. So, as Idara mentioned, my name is Mila, and I'm originally from the Philippines. I came to Edmonton almost 40 years ago as a graduate student at the University of Alberta. And today, I am active in the community as a writer, community organizer, and volunteer, as well as a human rights activist. So, some of the initiatives that I'm active in are organizing and putting up the annual Edmonton Filipino Fiesta. And I'm a member of the Inclusion and Diversity Council where I work, which has about 27,000 employees worldwide. So I organize events, workshops, and mentorships for multilingual and multicultural writers and artists. And I am also a member of international groups that fight disinformation and human rights injustices in the Philippines. So that's me. Let's start with some background on how Filipinos settled into Canada. So right now, there are over 70,000 Filipinos in Edmonton, okay, and about 167,000 in Alberta, and almost 1 million in the whole of Canada. Okay. It was in the late 1800s when the first Filipinos came to Canada as sailors. Very, very few. And it was not until the 1960s that the first wave of Filipinos came in. So the first wave were mostly skilled professionals, and they were mostly teachers, nurses, engineers. Okay. The second wave was in the 1970s because we had martial law in the Philippines. So the government wasn't very good, and many people were leaving the Philippines then. It was still mostly highly skilled Filipinos who were coming and settling into Canada, same as in Alberta. Then, in the late 1980s and 1990s, the caregivers program started, and this allowed those who came in as live-in caregivers to be permanent resident after 3 years of work. So many came from the Philippines, mostly women. Okay. Women who left their loved ones to come over to Canada to take care of other people's children. And the hope and the goal was to stay in Canada and bring their families later after they have gained their permanent residency. In 2000, in 2002, the problematic temporary foreign workers program started. This overseas hiring was mostly geared to low skill, low wage employment. Specifically in Alberta, starting in 2006, this resulted in many, many Filipinos coming over to work as fast food workers, work in custodial and cleaning jobs, meat packing jobs, hotel services, and many ended up being assigned to remote areas and small towns. This program was problematic because it painted a false picture of what is allowed for the foreign workers to stay in Canada, keeping in mind the history of Filipino immigration in Canada before this. I will talk more about these later when bringing up the challenges facing our community. But now in 2022, the Filipinos are the third largest minority group in Canada, and the Filipino language is one of the fastest growing minority language spoken in Canada. So let's take a pause right now and let's see the many faces you might encounter in Canada today, even in Edmonton. So, do you see someone who looks Korean or Japanese, who looks Filipino, Mexican, Cuban, maybe Nigerian or Chinese? Well, actually, all of these are Filipinos. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what a Filipino looks like. One of the many phrases I often hear when I tell people I come from the Philippines is, well, you don't look Filipino. And I think this experience is similar to many of us coming from racialized groups, where people sometimes have a set idea or a static concept of what a race should look like, or sound like, or act like. Other things that have been thrown at me is, oh, that was not very Filipino of you, or, oh, you are more Canadian now than Filipino. And to be honest, I do not understand who is keeping tabs or why there is a scorecard for things like this. That is why projects like Paint the Rails and sessions like this, the Human Library, where we learn from each other how complex and ever changing people and groups are very informative and helpful in doing away with thinking that is rigid, monotonous, and constricting. So, I'd like to go a bit over some Philippine history because it has many similarities to the background and experience of other colonized people. And it will also explain why there is a wide array of Filipino looks within such a small country. So, this is the Philippine map. The Philippines is made up of over 7,000 islands, and for the longest time, it was hard to travel and mingle between the islands. So, the distance maintained tribal and regional identities, sometimes over national identity. And then you will see the Philippines is bordered on the northeast by China, Korea, Japan, and then on the southeast by countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia. Okay. So, while we can say that majority of the Philippine population are of Malay descent and would look similar to people from Indonesia and Malaysia, we were also colonized by Spain for over 400 years, then Japan for 4 years, then the United States for about 50 years. As well, we were part of the Chinese Silk trade route. So the Philippines became a very mixed culture and society from very early on, and that remains to this day. In addition to impacting our physical appearance, one other important aspect of being colonized was our educational system was controlled by the ruling countries. For me personally, I grew up at a time when our schools were run on American system and American materials, even when we were not officially under the US at the time. So these were the books available to us then. The stories about people and places and activities that had nothing to do with our daily lives, nothing to do with what we saw in our families or neighborhoods, and in a language unfamiliar to us and our elders who were supposed to help us learn to read. From elementary to university, my peers and I were exposed only to books with aspirations that were completely foreign to us, with concepts and ideals that made us feel inadequate, that there seems to be something missing in us. We were filled with a definition of success that was unachievable. And for many, many years, this instilled the yearning for Filipinos to go abroad, as that was the prime definition of success. Specifically, you have to make it in America. So, even for me personally, when I got a full scholarship to study in Canada, some people greeted my news with, Ah, that's good enough. Canada's so close to America. You can move to America from there. And I believed them because that was all I knew. America was the holy grail. And I think this is typical of colonized thinking, where we are taught and made to aspire to become as close as possible to those who have colonized us. Anyway, I went to Edmonton, and when I arrived in Edmonton 40 years ago, it was a very different city. And remember, these were the days before the internet, before cell phones, way before Amazon and Skip the Dishes, right? So then, not a lot of people looked like me. There were not a lot of grocery stores or restaurants with food familiar or comforting to me. It was hard to find clothes and shoes that fit me because I was so small, and very few other people knew my language. It is not only difficult, but terrifying to be in a place or situation where you don't feel understood, nor seen, nor heard. Worse, when someone sees you for the wrong reasons, to make fun of you or to make you feel unwanted. Fortunately, the people who welcomed me and helped me outnumbered those who scorned me. And I think all my experiences of feeling unwanted, feeling different, misunderstood, taken advantage of, they all grew into a passion to not let others have to go through what I went through. That is why I am committed to being a crusader for inclusion and equity and human rights. One avenue I have chosen to open up spaces and magnify the voices of immigrants is through writing children's books, where the protagonists are immigrant children and their families. There is a big gap in books, films, TV shows, where protagonists come from marginalized cultures and their stories are told by people from that culture themselves. It is improving, but there are still gaps. So, one book I wrote has two stories in one book. The first one is Sandy Beaches to Snow. It's about a child's nervousness and fear moving from a tropical place to a snowy place. And the flip side story is about a child born in a winter place flying to visit her parents' home country and will be meeting her grandparents and cousins for the first time. I hope that the stories and images in my books can start dialogues between parents and children about customs and traditions, language, and generate more stories about that place halfway around the world that people in one's families or community keep talking about. I hope these books will instill not only interest but pride in one's heritage among the readers. Okay. This is my other book, which is Goodnight Philippines, Goodnight World, and it is about the diaspora in my community, as Filipinos have to go all over the world just to work. This book shows how they reconnect in various ways to their loved ones by saying goodnight. And the book has images from different places around the world, meshed with images from various parts of the Philippines. It includes 16 different languages, with the 8 major languages in the Philippines. And it also shows the various jobs that Filipinos have taken on around the world due to the high unemployment back home. Okay, the last book that I have included for this talk is Tony's Wheels. This is based on a true story about a close friend of mine. He got polio when he was 3 years old, and when he was about 15, he moved to Canada with his parents. The book shows snippets of life in the Philippines and the challenges Tony faced once he got to Canada and how he overcame them with others' help. And all these books are bilingual because I think it is important that the children from different heritage who are born here have a chance to read books about themselves and their families, also in the language of their parents or of their homes. And this is my friend Tony, the real life Tony, who eventually became a para athlete on the national level, representing Canada not only for one sport but three: wheelchair racing, kayaking, and downhill skiing. And he won three top medals for Canada from world and Olympic competitions. Tony also became the first advocate for people with disabilities in Alberta. So there are other Filipinos who have contributed to Edmonton and Canada. For example, here, these are artists who were recognized by Edmonton Arts Council. Um, this picture is Panfilo Quedado, who was the designer of the tropical area landscape in the Mutart Conservatory about 46 years ago. And then this one, she founded and continue to create organizations that teach to help immigrant women, to help ethnocultural teachers, or to keep teaching heritage languages. Okay. So there are many more, but I thought these three were pretty cool. And then it's heartening to know there are also younger Filipinos who have contributed to Edmonton or Canada, like Anne Makosinski, who was cited in Forbes, Inventor Forbes 30 under 30. And then, of course, there's Leila, Annie Fernandez, who plays tennis, and Gilmore Junio, who is an Olympic speed skater. Okay. One other contribution we have is that across Canada, June has been declared as Philippine Heritage Month. And why would that be important? Observing heritage months add to the diverse fabric of Canadian life. They promote awareness and education about the importance of heritage. Okay, not only for Filipinos, this enriches Canadian culture as a whole. And for the people identifying with that heritage, it provides us with a feeling of being recognized, valued, and appreciated. So, in Edmonton, every June, we have the Edmonton Filipino Fiesta, and I hope you take the time to attend it. Third week of June every year. Okay. This fiesta is recognized as one of the bigger yearly events in Edmonton, attracting over 15,000 people over 2 days. This gives our community a chance to showcase our heritage, music, arts, and of course, food. Celebrations like the Filipino Fiesta is a good example of the use of art, music, food, community, and stories to learn about the diverse makeup of our city. As well, being able to openly show one's pride in one's culture promotes community building. It allows us to reclaim traditions of gathering, mutual learning, and sharing in a very happy occasion. So it's kind of like a communal celebration of our identity. So it's important, again, as I say, to know one is valued and recognized just as who you are, that differences can be celebrated. And this really fosters a sense of belonging and a willingness to be open to other cultures as well. And it is good for children who are born here to understand their parents and communities better. So it would have been great had I been able to just end my talk on this slide about festivals and food, but it would not be realistic to not mention the challenges in my community. So I would say the biggest contribution of Filipinos to Canada is also very much related to the main challenges of our community. Our biggest contribution is, for the last 50 years, Canadian Filipinos have provided Canada and the Canadian society in general with cheap but high quality labor through the Live-in Caregiver Program and Foreign Temporary Workers Program. Sadly, these short-sighted programs took advantage of many Filipinos' desire to escape poverty from back home. On arrival in Canada, The workers readily take on menial and low paying jobs that many others are not willing to do because migrant workers have to start working right away and they cannot go on welfare. Many of these low income workers were frontline heroes keeping Canadians clean, fed, and safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. But many times, they did not even have the same access to the support available to Canadian residents. So, the next slide, I'm listing some of the challenges of my community. One is the fragility of the foreign worker status. There is so much room for exploitation in a program where workers are given only temporary permits. The people become disposable, allowed to be in Canada only when useful for commerce and business. If there is space for these workers to be in Canada, to work and contribute to society during their temporary permit, there should be space for them to stay permanently as well. Next is stereotyping. So the presence of so many Filipino workers who came in through this low wage, low skilled program also led to stereotyping, attaching Filipinos only to these kinds of jobs. And these jobs are not deemed valuable, not given the worth they should have. And some look down on people doing these menial jobs. So the first two bullet points together led to a lot of insecurity, feeling of loneliness. Also, if you factor in the separation of families, right? Other challenges are there's so many of us here, but we are invisible in representation in the government and governing bodies, where policies and programs that affect our daily lives are being made. Bad government for a very long time in the Philippines have made Filipinos also distrust the government and formal policies. In addition, we have these traditional values focusing on individual work, on being quiet and being non resistant and deferring to tradition and authority. Because of this, we can be siloed and uninformed about the indigenous history of Canada, for example, and other cultures and matters of diversity and human rights. Okay. Because of the focus on our isolated struggles, the focus on relying on yourself and individual hard work, it prevents us sometimes from seeing that racism and injustices are systemic and interconnected, that the struggles of other people, other cultures, other migrant workers, the exploitation, other injustices, these are all interconnected, and it would be good if we collaborated and worked together. Sometimes it's also understandable because it can be overwhelming to think of all of these systemic hurdles, right? So many newcomers and immigrants think we have enough problems already. Why should I stick my nose into other people's problems? We have the feeling that the current systems are just too entrenched. The people in power are just too established, too powerful, and that money will always win and people like me cannot do anything. It's understandable to feel overwhelmed with very big issues facing us today. But although the problem like racism or sexism or injustices can feel insurmountable, I believe many small efforts can add up to progress. What are some of the steps we can take? Even young people, right? We can use our social media to speak out against injustices in a respectful way and unfollow accounts that support hate or racism. We can keep educating ourselves about system oppression, understand our privilege, recognize and reject traditions and ways of thinking that are anti people of color. There are many libraries who provide resources that will help us with this. We can have honest dialogues with family and friends. Okay, we can volunteer, donate, support anti-racism campaigns, and we can also choose to buy from people of color owned small businesses instead of corporations. Okay. There are many other ways we can help, but we don't have to do them all. I think we can choose one or two. Otherwise, it really gets, as I said, overwhelming. And for me, I strongly believe in inspiring and empowering the young people. That's why I also write those children's books. I think it's important to intentionally reach out and inspire and empower the youth, to ask and address what are we teaching the next generation and what are we learning from them? What opportunities are we opening up so young people can lead, like actually lead? We need the young people with their new ideas, their fearless energy, and their willingness to change, to challenge status quo. We need them to lead with knowledge and confidence and support. During one of my book tours in Winnipeg, a young Filipino girl came up to me and asked, "Are you really a writer?" And I said, "Yes, I am." "And you're a Filipino?" She continued. "Yes, that's right," I said. And her next question was, "Can I not be a nurse when I grow up? Can I be a writer instead?" Looking back at 9-year-old me in the 1960s, I would never have had a chance nor courage to ask a question that went against what my family or community expected of me. But I was so happy that to this young girl, I could truthfully respond with, "Yes, you can choose what you want to do." I could say yes because I know there are already many of us working and fighting today to make sure that it would be possible for others to dream, to have choices, and to be accepted and valued for the choices one makes. And I will end my time with you with one request. Take someone with you. As you forge forward towards big and small successes, will you consider taking someone with you? As you succeed and reach your goals, would you please remember to make the path a little bit wider, a little bit smoother for those following behind you? Thank you.